Every one of us wakes up each day with questions, some small, some existential. But there's one question that echoes deeper than the rest. Why am I here? It's a question that transcends careers, relationships, even success itself. I'm not here today to give you the answer. I'm here to give you the tools to uncover it yourself. Because neuroscience shows us that purpose isn't just philosophical, it's biological. It lives in your brain, it shapes your behavior, and it can be built. So if you've ever felt lost, stuck, or unsure of your path, you're not broken. You're human. And you're just one insight away from finding the compass within you. ChatGPT said, purpose is not just some abstract ideal passed down in self-help books or spiritual teachings. It's a fundamental biological need. At a neurological level, the human brain is constantly scanning the environment for patterns that signal meaning. We are wired to seek a sense of direction because it helps us survive, thrive, and belong. When scientists look at the brain through functional MRI scans, they see that when someone is engaged in an activity they believe is meaningful, a very specific network of brain regions lights up. One of the most critical is the mesolimbic dopamine system, the same circuit involved in motivation, reward, and reinforcement learning. Dopamine is often misunderstood. It's not just the molecule of pleasure, it's the molecule of anticipation, of drive, of energy toward a goal. And here's where it connects deeply with purpose. When you're doing something that feels aligned with your values, your identity, or the contribution you want to make to the world, the brain floods these circuits with dopamine. This creates a feedback loop. Your brain begins to tag these purposeful behaviors as important, reinforcing your desire to do them again. In other words, the more aligned your actions are with your sense of meaning, the more energized and focused your brain becomes. This is not theory, it's measurable, observable neuroscience. On the flip side, when we lack purpose, when we drift, feel stuck, or question why we're doing what we're doing, those same circuits become underactive. This results in what many of us recognize as burnout, apathy, or even depression. Without purpose, the brain loses a key organizing principle. Motivation declines, resilience drops, attention becomes fragmented. You might still be functional, you might still be productive on the outside, but internally your nervous system is adrift. And over time, this neurological misalignment can affect not just your mental health, but your physical health as well. Chronic stress increases, sleep suffers, and your immune system can even be compromised. What's fascinating is that purpose is protective. Studies show that people with a strong sense of purpose live longer, recover faster from illness, and are more resistant to cognitive decline. That's not magic, it's biology. Purpose gives the brain a signal that says, stay alert, stay invested, this matters. And the brain responds by optimizing the systems that support your physical and emotional well-being. In practical terms, this means that finding your purpose isn't some luxury reserved for the privileged, it's a form of self-regulation and mental optimization available to all of us. It means that purpose isn't something you wait to discover, it's something you can build, and the brain will meet you halfway once you start. It also means that when you feel most alive, most connected, most focused, that's not just a fleeting emotional state. That's your nervous system telling you pay attention. There's something important here. Keep going. The prefrontal cortex is one of the most fascinating and powerful structures in the human brain. It sits just behind your forehead and is often referred to as the command center of your mind. It's the region responsible for planning, decision-making, evaluating long-term consequences, regulating emotions, and crucially for constructing a narrative of self, who you are, what matters to you, and where you're headed. When we talk about purpose, we're really talking about the consistent activation and shaping of this part of the brain. Purpose is not something that merely exists in the abstract. It's built moment by moment through the actions we take and the thoughts we choose to repeat. And it's the prefrontal cortex that does the heavy lifting in this process. When you sit down to reflect on your goals, when you pause before reacting to consider whether something aligns with your values, or when you resist a short-term temptation in order to invest in a long-term outcome, you are actively training your prefrontal cortex. You're teaching it to prioritize what's meaningful over what's immediate. This is important because from a neurological perspective, the brain is constantly weighing options, asking, is this worth my energy? Without a clearly defined sense of purpose, the prefrontal cortex doesn't have a stable reference point. That leads to what we often experience as indecision, procrastination, or even anxiety. The brain is looking for structure, for orientation, and purpose provides that. When you have a strong sense of why you're doing something, the prefrontal cortex becomes more efficient. It's able to suppress distractions, filter irrelevant information, and guide behavior with far greater precision. There's another dimension here that makes purpose especially powerful. The prefrontal cortex is involved in what scientists call top-down control. This means it has the ability to override impulses coming from more primitive parts of the brain, like the limbic system, which is responsible for emotion, fear, and reward-seeking behavior. In the absence of purpose, those lower brain regions tend to dominate. You might find yourself chasing instant gratification, reacting emotionally, or avoiding discomfort. But when the prefrontal cortex is engaged with a larger goal, it can modulate those impulses, allowing you to act in accordance with your values, even in the face of stress or temptation. This is why people with a strong sense of purpose often appear more disciplined or focused. It's not that they have superhuman willpower, it's that their prefrontal cortex is more consistently aligned with a North Star, and that alignment strengthens its control over behavior. Over time, this actually changes the structure of the brain. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself, means that the more you engage your prefrontal cortex in purpose-driven thought and behavior, the stronger those neural circuits become, and the benefits go far beyond productivity. A well-trained prefrontal cortex is associated with greater emotional resilience, improved relationships, and enhanced cognitive performance. It helps you regulate fear, manage stress, and connect more deeply with others. It also plays a role in empathy and moral reasoning, suggesting that when your purpose includes contributing to something larger than yourself, it engages these social circuits in a profound way. What this means is that purpose isn't just a motivational idea, it's a functional framework for how your brain makes sense of the world. It gives structure to your thoughts, coherence to your actions, and continuity to your identity over time. It turns fleeting motivation into sustained momentum. And most importantly, it allows you to live not just with direction, but with integrity, where your actions, beliefs, and values are fully aligned. When that happens, the brain doesn't just function better, it thrives. Neuroplasticity is one of the most hopeful and transformative concepts in neuroscience. It refers to the brain's remarkable ability to change structurally and functionally in response to experience, learning, and deliberate practice. For decades, scientists believed that the adult brain was relatively fixed, that it reached a peak in childhood or adolescence, and then slowly declined. But now we know that the brain is dynamic throughout life. It's not just capable of change, it's constantly rewiring itself based on what you do, what you think, what you focus on, and even what you believe about yourself. This discovery is especially powerful when we talk about purpose. Many people assume that finding purpose is a matter of luck or fate, that you either stumble upon it or you don't. But neuroscience tells a very different story. Purpose is not found, it's built. And the tool we use to build it is neuroplasticity. Every time you reflect on what matters to you, every time you take a small step toward a meaningful goal, every time you resist distraction and instead engage in something that feels aligned with your deeper values, you're strengthening the neural circuits associated with purpose. These repeated actions and thoughts carve new pathways in the brain, reinforcing the association between what you're doing and why it matters. This process doesn't require massive changes. In fact, neuroplasticity thrives on repetition and consistency. Even seemingly small choices, like spending 10 minutes a day journaling about your goals, or choosing to engage in work that challenges you, can lead to significant rewiring over time. The key is that your brain learns what you repeatedly pay attention to. If you consistently focus on things that feel aimless or disconnected from your values, your brain wires for apathy, distraction, and fragmentation. But if you continually bring your attention back to things that feel purposeful, even when they're hard, your brain adapts. It begins to prioritize those behaviors, emotions, and thoughts, making them more automatic and accessible in the future. What's truly incredible is that this rewiring happens both in the structure of the brain and in its chemistry. Purpose-driven actions activate circuits in the prefrontal cortex, but they also engage the dopaminergic system, which releases chemicals that reinforce learning, motivation, and memory. So the more you act in alignment with your emerging sense of purpose, the more your brain rewards you with feelings of clarity, momentum, and satisfaction. It becomes easier over time not because the tasks get easier, but because your brain has become better at processing them through the lens of meaning. There's also evidence that engaging in purposeful behavior enhances connectivity between brain regions, specifically between areas involved in emotion regulation, decision-making, and long-term planning. This means that as you build purpose, you also become more emotionally resilient and cognitively flexible. You start to see challenges not as threats, but as opportunities for growth. You interpret setbacks not as failures, but as data. This kind of mindset doesn't emerge overnight, but it is a direct result of the neuroplastic changes that happen when you repeatedly choose to act with intention. Importantly, this process is available to everyone. You don't need a perfect childhood, a clear 5-year plan, or a moment of divine inspiration to start building purpose. You just need to start where you are and begin paying attention to what energizes you, what holds your attention, what feels meaningful, even in small ways. Each time you make a purposeful decision, you're not just changing your life in that moment, you're teaching your brain how to create a new identity. Someone who lives with intention, someone who finds meaning in the process, someone who is actively shaping their future. This is why the concept of neuroplasticity is so liberating. It removes the idea that your sense of purpose is something static or predetermined. Instead, it becomes a skill, one you can develop, refine, and expand. And the more you engage in this process, the more your brain supports it. Over time, it becomes your default mode of thinking and living. You begin to move through the world with greater clarity and confidence, not because you've finally found your purpose, but because you've built it neuron by neuron, choice by choice. When people talk about finding their purpose, they often imagine it as a single defining moment, an epiphany, a bolt of clarity, a sudden realization that points them to their life's mission. But in reality, for most people, it doesn't happen that way. Neuroscience and human behavior suggest that purpose doesn't arrive fully formed. Instead, it emerges gradually through patterns of curiosity, engagement, and exploration. Clarity is not the starting point of purpose, it's the outcome of consistently following what interests you, what pulls your attention, and what sparks something deeper in your brain and body. Curiosity is the brain's natural compass. It's the feeling you get when you read a line in a book that makes you pause and reread it. It's the quiet pull toward a subject, a skill, or a question that doesn't quite make sense, but feels worth pursuing. This curiosity is often subtle, and it's easy to overlook in a world obsessed with instant answers and linear paths. But it is biologically significant. When you follow your curiosity, the brain releases small amounts of dopamine, not in a huge rush like with external rewards, but in a steady way that supports sustained engagement. It's the brain's way of saying, "There's something here, keep going." One of the most important things to understand is that you don't need to have everything figured out in order to begin building purpose. Waiting for perfect clarity before taking action often leads to stagnation and indecision. In contrast, acting on even small moments of genuine interest creates momentum. Each time you follow a curiosity, whether it's diving deeper into a topic, trying a new project, having a certain kind of conversation, you're giving your brain feedback. You're showing it what feels meaningful, and it begins to map those experiences, slowly forming a network of insights and values that point toward a deeper sense of direction. What often holds people back is the belief that their purpose must be grand, impressive, or fully formed. But purpose rarely shows up in that way. It starts as a whisper, not a shout. And when you give yourself permission to follow curiosity without demanding immediate answers, you open up a space for real discovery. This is where neuroplasticity comes in again. Your brain starts to strengthen the connections related to the things you care about. It begins to recognize patterns across different experiences and builds a foundation for long-term goals rooted in authentic interest. There's also something powerful about the emotional experience of curiosity. When you are genuinely intrigued by something, your entire nervous system becomes more alert, more open, and more responsive. You're more likely to enter a state of flow, a deeply immersive mental state where time seems to vanish and effort feels effortless. These are not random occurrences, they are signals. Flow states are often a sign that you are operating close to your natural wiring, close to activities that could evolve into purpose. When people reflect on their most meaningful life experiences, they often describe moments of intense curiosity, discovery, and engagement, not moments of complete certainty or control. Following your curiosity also builds resilience. When you're connected to something that genuinely interests you, you're more likely to persist through difficulty. Setbacks become part of the learning process rather than evidence that you're on the wrong path. This is critical because any purposeful life will include moments of challenge, doubt, and failure. Curiosity creates a buffer against these moments by giving your brain something deeper to anchor to, something intrinsically rewarding that makes the struggle worthwhile. Another misconception is that curiosity is frivolous or self-indulgent. In reality, it's the foundation of creativity, innovation, and progress. Many of the world's greatest thinkers, artists, scientists, and leaders didn't start with a fully formed vision. They started with a question, a problem they couldn't stop thinking about, a fascination they couldn't ignore. Over time, as they followed that thread, it wove itself into a purpose that was unique to them. The same process is available to you. You don't need to see the whole path to take the next step. You just need to be willing to trust the feeling that says this matters even if I don't know why yet. Eventually, the scattered moments of curiosity begin to converge. Patterns emerge. You start to notice that certain activities leave you feeling more alive, more focused, more aligned with who you are and who you want to become. That's when purpose begins to solidify, not as a single answer, but as a direction, a compass, a way of navigating life that feels both grounded and evolving. And the more you act in alignment with that compass, the clearer the path becomes. Not because you predicted it, but because you built it through experience. Purpose is not a lightning strike. It is the result of attention, exploration, and trust in your own inner signals. So if you're unsure of your purpose, don't wait for clarity. Instead, notice what draws your attention. Follow it, play with it, learn from it. Let it lead you somewhere unexpected. Because hidden inside those moments of curiosity are the seeds of something far greater, something that over time can grow into a life filled with meaning, direction, and deep personal fulfillment. Stress is often viewed as something to avoid at all costs, a negative force that drains energy, clouds thinking, and disrupts our sense of well-being. But that view is only half the story. Neuroscience reveals a more nuanced and powerful truth. Stress can be a guide. It can point us toward purpose, growth, and transformation if we learn how to interpret it correctly. Understanding how stress interacts with the brain allows us to shift our relationship with it from something to fear to something to study, navigate, and even use as a compass. At the neurological level, stress activates the sympathetic nervous system and triggers the release of stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. These chemicals prepare the body for action, heightening alertness and sharpening attention. In moderate doses, this physiological response can actually enhance performance. It's the same system that gets activated when we face meaningful challenges, giving a presentation, applying for a dream opportunity, having a difficult but necessary conversation. In these moments, stress isn't a sign you're on the wrong path. It's often a sign that you're engaging with something that matters deeply to you. The brain doesn't generate stress randomly. It responds to perceived stakes. If you're doing something trivial or inconsequential, your stress response remains low. But when you approach something that touches your values, your identity, or your aspirations, the stress response intensifies. That's because your nervous system recognizes the potential impact of the situation. It knows that what you're engaging with could shape your future. In this way, stress becomes a signal, a kind of emotional and physiological feedback system that tells you, pay attention, this could be important. However, not all stress is the same. Chronic, uncontrolled stress, especially when it's tied to situations where we feel helpless or disconnected, can be harmful to the brain and body. But what neuroscience is increasingly showing is that stress, when tied to meaningful goals or pursuits, can be constructive. This is sometimes referred to as eustress, positive stress that enhances motivation, focus, and resilience. It's the kind of stress that elite athletes experience before a competition, or that creatives feel before launching their work into the world. It's challenging, yes, but it also sharpens performance and reinforces a sense of purpose. When you begin to view stress through this lens, your entire mindset shifts. Instead of asking, how can I eliminate stress? You start asking, what is this stress trying to tell me? This question is powerful because it leads you inward. Maybe the discomfort you're feeling about your job isn't just about pressure. It could be pointing to a misalignment with your values. Maybe the anxiety you feel before starting a new project is actually excitement in disguise, a sign that you're stepping into territory that could change you. Maybe the fear you experience when thinking about a big life change is a reflection of how important it is to you. not a signal to stop but a challenge to rise. From a behavioral standpoint, stress can also enhance learning and memory, particularly when it's framed in the context of purpose. When your brain senses that something is important, it allocates more cognitive resources to process and retain that experience. This is why some of the most stressful moments in your life are also the most memorable. They were emotionally charged and tied to significant meaning. If you harness that awareness, you can begin to use stress as a tool for insight. You can ask, where do I feel resistance? What situations make me nervous, yet strangely drawn in? What tasks do I avoid, not because they're meaningless, but because they might require a version of myself I haven't fully stepped into yet? Engaging with these questions doesn't make stress disappear, but it does give it a purpose. It transforms it from something that paralyzes you into something that informs you, and that shift changes how your brain responds. When you believe that stress is helping you grow, your physiological response to it actually changes. Studies have shown that people who view stress as a tool rather than a threat have healthier cardiovascular responses, lower inflammation, and faster recovery after intense effort. Their bodies are still mobilized, but in a way that supports performance instead of undermining it. Stress also tends to show up at the edges of our comfort zones, the places where growth happens. These are the spaces where old neural pathways are being challenged, where new learning and behavioral patterns are beginning to take shape. If you avoid those spaces entirely, you remain neurologically and psychologically stagnant. But if you learn to approach them with curiosity and compassion, stress becomes a doorway to a deeper sense of who you are and who you're becoming. It becomes a mirror, showing you where you still have fears to face and strengths to develop. This doesn't mean that all stress is good, or that you should seek it out indiscriminately. It means becoming discerning. Learning to distinguish between the noise of stress that comes from overcommitment or disconnection, and the signal of stress that comes from stretching into your potential. The latter is often uncomfortable, but it is also profoundly meaningful. It's where purpose takes shape, not as an idea, but as a lived experience. When you begin to see stress as a guide rather than an enemy, you develop a new kind of courage. You stop waiting for comfort and start leaning into the discomfort that signals growth. You stop avoiding the hard conversations, the bold decisions, the risks that make your heart race. Because now you understand that tightness in your chest, that lump in your throat, that mental tension, that's not failure, that's purpose knocking. And your willingness to answer determines how fully you'll step into the life that's waiting on the other side. The human brain is wired for connection. From birth, our survival depends on it, and as we grow, our sense of identity, belonging, and even purpose is deeply shaped by the relationships we form. Neuroscience confirms what ancient wisdom has long suggested, that we are not isolated minds navigating life alone, but social beings whose brains are constantly influenced by the people around us. When we talk about finding purpose, one of the most overlooked yet powerful truths is this: purpose is not just an individual pursuit. It is often awakened, shaped, and sustained through connection with others. At the neurological level, interacting with other people activates a vast and complex network of brain regions. The medial prefrontal cortex, the temporoparietal junction, the anterior cingulate cortex, and the mirror neuron system all light up when we engage in meaningful social interaction. These areas are involved in empathy, understanding intentions, emotional resonance, and interpreting the behaviors of others. They allow us to feel what someone else feels, to imagine their experiences, and to build relationships that go beyond surface-level interaction. This matters because when you're connected to others in a genuine way, your brain releases oxytocin, a neurochemical associated with trust, bonding, and emotional safety. Oxytocin doesn't just make us feel good, it has profound effects on stress regulation, immune function, and even our ability to recover from trauma. And perhaps most importantly, it reinforces a sense of belonging. Belonging is not a luxury, it's a neurobiological need. Without it, the brain becomes more prone to fear, hypervigilance, and feelings of meaninglessness. But with it, we are more resilient, more open, and more capable of pursuing something greater than ourselves. Purpose, in its most powerful form, often arises not from self-interest alone, but from contribution, from the feeling that our actions matter in the lives of others. Whether it's showing up for a friend, teaching something you've learned, or simply being present for someone in pain, these moments activate reward centers in the brain, particularly in the ventral striatum and the orbit of frontal cortex. These are the same areas associated with pleasure and motivation, In other words, helping others isn't just morally good, it's neurologically reinforcing. It creates a feedback loop in which acts of connection and service deepen your sense of meaning and motivate further purposeful behavior. When people feel lost or disconnected from their purpose, they often turn inward, hoping to think their way into clarity. But what the science shows is that some of the deepest insights about who we are and why we're here come not from solitary introspection, but from relationship. There are conversations that change us. There are people who, by simply reflecting back our value or challenging us to grow, help us see a version of ourselves we didn't know existed. These interpersonal experiences can ignite something in the brain, new perspectives, new beliefs, and sometimes entirely new trajectories. There's also a regulatory function to connection. When we're overwhelmed, discouraged, or burned out, our nervous systems become dysregulated. We enter states of chronic stress, which impair executive function, emotional control, and goal-directed behavior. But when we experience co-regulation, when someone else listens deeply, validates our emotions, or simply sits with us in our pain, our parasympathetic nervous system kicks in. Heart rate slows, breathing deepens, and the prefrontal cortex begins to re-engage. In this state, it becomes possible again to think clearly, to envision a future, to reconnect with what matters. This is why isolation is one of the greatest barriers to purpose. Not just physical isolation, but emotional disconnection. The feeling that no one sees you, that your experiences don't matter, that you're alone in your struggles. This kind of loneliness isn't just emotionally painful, it's neurologically damaging. It alters brain function, increases inflammation, and leads to cognitive decline. But the inverse is also true. When you are seen, heard, and valued by others, your brain changes. It becomes more adaptive, more resilient, and more capable of sustaining long-term goals. Even the way we talk about purpose reveals this truth. People rarely describe their sense of meaning in purely individualistic terms. They talk about the people they love, the communities they serve, the teams they lead, the students they teach, the causes they stand for. Purpose becomes real when it transcends the self, when it becomes something that lives not just in your mind, but in the web of relationships you've built. And through those relationships, it gains depth, direction, and staying power. In a very real sense, connection is not just a support system for purpose, it is a catalyst. It reminds you that you matter, even when you forget. It challenges you to grow, even when you're afraid. And it brings out your most authentic self, the version of you that's not performing, not hiding, but showing up with presence, vulnerability, and strength. This version of you is not created in isolation. It is drawn out by others who see your potential and invite you to live into it. So if you're searching for purpose, start by nurturing connection. Surround yourself with people who reflect your values, who inspire curiosity, who hold you accountable to your better self. Listen deeply, share honestly, give generously, because in doing so you're not just building relationships, you're building purpose, one interaction, one conversation, one act of presence at a time. And over time, those moments will stitch themselves into a life that feels deeply rooted, profoundly meaningful, and unmistakably yours. One of the most overlooked yet profoundly transformative truths about purpose is that it often reveals itself through small, consistent actions rather than grand, sweeping changes. There's a popular myth that finding your purpose requires a massive life overhaul, a sudden leap into the unknown, quitting your job, moving to another country, or chasing a dream without a safety net. While these dramatic shifts can sometimes play a role, the more common science-backed reality is that purpose is discovered incrementally. It's not always a matter of taking a giant leap, but of taking one meaningful step after another. And the key to unlocking this is action. In neuroscience, there's a concept called behavior-driven neuroplasticity. This refers to the way that repeated behaviors actually shape the architecture of the brain. When you engage in a certain activity repeatedly, the brain begins to rewire itself to support and optimize that behavior. Neurons that fire together wire together. So when you consistently act on something meaningful, even in small ways, you're not just performing a task, you're training your brain to recognize, reinforce, and pursue that value. Over time, these micro-decisions carve a pathway through the neural landscape, transforming vague interests into a lived sense of purpose. Waiting for motivation or clarity before acting is one of the most common traps people fall into. But the brain doesn't work that way. Motivation often follows action, not the other way around. When you take a small, deliberate step, whether that's journaling about something you care about, volunteering a few hours a week, having a conversation that matters, or building a simple habit, you generate internal feedback. Your brain responds by releasing dopamine, a neurotransmitter associated with reward and learning. That dopamine doesn't just make you feel good, it teaches your brain that what you're doing is worth repeating. And so even without complete clarity, you begin to build momentum. Clarity is not something you wait for, it's something you create. Through trial, reflection, and repetition, you gather data about yourself. You begin to notice what lights you up and what drains you. You identify patterns, types of work, people, or conversations that leave you feeling energized versus depleted. And those observations become a compass. But none of that self-knowledge becomes available until you start doing. Reflection without action tends to become rumination. But action, even if imperfect, creates movement, and movement generates insight. There's also a psychological phenomenon called self-perception theory, which suggests that people infer their own attitudes and values by observing their behavior. In other words, we come to understand what we care about by noticing what we consistently choose to do. This is a subtle but powerful idea. If you consistently choose to help others, to create, to teach, to protect, or to innovate, you begin to see yourself as the kind of person who does those things, and that identity becomes more stable and more compelling over time. Eventually, it becomes part of your purpose, not just what you do, but who you are. Even the smallest actions matter, because they compound. One meaningful conversation can lead to a new idea. One book can change how you think. One new habit can restructure your day. And once you take one step, the next becomes easier. The nervous system is built to adapt, but it needs consistent input. When you act, you activate systems in the brain that regulate attention, reward, and long-term planning. You begin to build what psychologists call self-efficacy, the belief that you can take control of your life and influence your environment. And that belief is essential to discovering and sustaining purpose. The mistake many people make is waiting until they feel confident, until the conditions are perfect, or until someone else gives them permission. But confidence is not the cause of action, it's the result of it. You act, you learn, you adapt, and over time you build trust in yourself. Purpose follows that trust. It's not something handed to you from the outside. It's something that emerges from the inside out, through daily choices, through courage in the face of uncertainty, and through persistence when things don't go as planned. There will be resistance. Your brain is designed to conserve energy, to stick to what's familiar, to protect you from perceived threats. Anytime you stretch into new behavior, especially if it feels vulnerable or uncertain, you're going to face internal pushback. But that's not a sign to stop. It's a sign you're doing something that matters. The key is to lower the activation energy, to make the first step so small that resistance has no foothold. Instead of writing a book, write a paragraph. Instead of overhauling your life, change one part of your morning routine. Instead of planning your entire future, choose a direction and walk in it today. Over time, those small steps shift the trajectory of your entire life. This is not about perfection, it's about participation. Purpose isn't something you find in a flash of brilliance. It's something you build, brick by brick, with your actions. And the beauty of this approach is that it puts the power back in your hands. You don't need to have everything figured out. You don't need to wait until you're fearless or fully prepared. You just need to act, and trust that through consistent, meaningful engagement, the path will reveal itself. Because the truth is, you're not going to think your way into a new life. You're going to act your way into it, and every single step counts. One of the most powerful forces shaping your sense of purpose is your environment. The spaces you inhabit, the people you surround yourself with, the routines you follow, and even the digital inputs you consume, all of these shape your thoughts, emotions, and ultimately your trajectory. While many people search for purpose internally through self-reflection, meditation, or introspection, they often overlook the profound impact of what's happening externally. The truth is, your brain is constantly in dialogue with your environment, and if that environment is not aligned with your deeper values or aspirations, it becomes significantly harder to access the clarity, energy, and focus needed to live with purpose. From a neurological perspective, The brain is always adapting to the stimuli around it. This process, known as neuroplasticity, means that your surroundings quite literally sculpt your neural architecture over time. The more you're exposed to certain patterns, whether they're visual, auditory, emotional, or behavioral, the more likely your brain is to build and reinforce circuits that support those patterns. If you spend most of your time in environments filled with distraction, negativity, or chaos, your brain learns to normalize that. It becomes wired for stress, fragmentation, and reactivity. On the other hand, if your environment is rich with cues that support focus, inspiration, and intentional living, your brain adapts accordingly. It becomes more regulated, more attentive, and more aligned with long-term goals. This means that if you're struggling to find your purpose, one of the most practical and impactful things you can do is audit your environment. Look at the spaces you spend your time in. Are they energizing or depleting? Do they invite reflection or scatter your attention? Even subtle factors like clutter, lighting, noise levels, or constant interruptions can influence your cognitive state. The brain craves order and clarity when it's trying to solve complex problems or make meaningful decisions. Creating an environment that supports this mental state isn't about perfection, it's about intentionality. It's about surrounding yourself with cues that signal to your nervous system. This is a place where meaningful work and self-discovery happen. Equally important are the people you allow into your environment. Human beings are inherently social creatures, and our brains are wired for connection through mechanisms like mirror neurons, which cause us to automatically mimic and internalize the emotions, behaviors, and values of those around us. If you spend time with people who are cynical, disempowered, or constantly focused on surface-level goals, that mindset will subtly shape your own, not because you're weak, but because your brain is designed to attune to the emotional tone of your tribe. Conversely, being in the presence of people who live with passion, curiosity, and integrity has a contagious effect. It elevates your own sense of what's possible and awakens dormant aspects of yourself. Your environment also includes what you consume, the books you read, the podcasts you listen to, the content you scroll through. These are all inputs that your brain processes and integrates. If you are constantly consuming noise, outrage, or distraction, it becomes harder to hear your own inner voice. Your attention becomes fragmented, and with it, your ability to discern what truly matters. But if you begin to curate your informational diet with the same care that you would curate your physical space, choosing to fill it with ideas, stories, and voices that elevate your thinking, you begin to create an internal ecosystem that supports growth and meaning. Routines and habits are another critical part of your environment because they create the invisible architecture of your day. Most people underestimate the influence of small, repeated behaviors, but from a neuroscientific standpoint, habits are the building blocks of identity. They train your brain to expect certain patterns and prepare for certain actions. If your daily environment reinforces distraction, procrastination, or avoidance, then over time, that becomes your baseline. But if your environment gently nudges you toward consistency, presence, and intentional action, even in small ways, it begins to shift your entire sense of self. You start to see yourself as someone who follows through, who makes time for what matters, who shows up for the deeper questions of life. This doesn't mean you need to wait for the perfect environment before pursuing purpose. Life is often messy, and many people don't have the luxury of choosing every detail of their surroundings. But what you can do, what is always within your power, is to influence your environment in small but significant ways. It might mean carving out a corner of your room for quiet reflection. It might mean spending more time in nature, which has been shown to regulate the nervous system and increase feelings of connectedness. It might mean distancing yourself from relationships that drain you and seeking out communities that lift you. It might mean setting boundaries around your time and attention so that your days aren't consumed by the agendas of others. Changing your environment can feel subtle, but its effects are profound. Because the more aligned your external world becomes with your internal values, the less resistance you feel. Your energy begins to flow more freely, your thoughts become more coherent, your emotional state becomes more stable, and in that space of coherence, your purpose begins to emerge, not as something you force, but as something that rises naturally from within. Your environment then becomes a mirror reflecting back the kind of life you are choosing to build, day by day, decision by decision. Ultimately, finding your purpose is not just about going inward, it's also about shaping the outer world so that it supports the inner work. It's about recognizing that the space you live in, the people you engage with, the habits you follow, and the inputs you allow are not neutral. They are actively shaping the narrative of your life. And when you align those external elements with the vision you hold for your future, you begin to create the conditions in which purpose not only becomes visible, but sustainable. There is a deeply rooted misconception in our culture that purpose is something you arrive at, a fixed destination, a final revelation that suddenly makes your life complete. But the truth is far more dynamic and nuanced. Purpose is not static, it is a living, evolving process. It changes as you grow, as you experience new things, and as your understanding of yourself and the world deepens. When we try to lock ourselves into one version of what purpose is supposed to look like, we risk limiting our growth. We forget that the human brain, especially the adult brain, is incredibly plastic, capable of learning, transforming, and reorienting throughout life. Embracing the evolving nature of purpose is not a compromise, it is a sign of wisdom and maturity. Neuroscience shows us that our brains are not hardwired with a single life path. Instead, they are equipped with the ability to adapt through a process called neuroplasticity. Your brain literally changes in response to experience. Every new piece of information you take in, every skill you learn, every challenge you face, all of these reshape the connections in your brain. That means your perspective on life, your sense of identity, and your feeling of purpose can and should change over time. This is not a flaw in the system, this is the system working exactly as it should. Early in life, your sense of purpose may be driven by exploration, by the desire to experience as much of the world as possible, to gather information, try different paths, and see what resonates. This phase is critical, it creates the neural diversity your brain needs to make informed decisions later on. But if you cling too tightly to the idea that you must have it all figured out from the start, you close yourself off from discovery. You begin to define yourself not by what you're becoming, but by who you've been. And that rigid identity can become a prison. As you move through different phases of life, your values shift. The things that once felt meaningful may begin to feel empty. You might wake up one day and realize that the path you've been walking no longer aligns with who you are. This can feel unsettling, like losing your footing, but it's actually a powerful opportunity. It's your brain signaling that it's time to rewire, to update your internal map based on new data. If you resist this call for change, you invite stagnation. But if you listen, if you allow yourself to evolve, you create space for a new kind of purpose to emerge, one that is more aligned with your current truth. Purpose then is not a single answer to a single question, it's an ongoing conversation with life. It's something you return to, revise, and redefine as you grow. This perspective requires humility, it requires you to let go of the ego-driven need to always know, always control, always project certainty. Instead, it invites curiosity. It asks you to become a student of your own life, to notice what energizes you now, what questions you're asking today, what challenges stir something deep in you that didn't before. This evolutionary view of purpose is also backed by psychological research. Studies in developmental psychology have shown that people's goals and motivations change significantly across the lifespan. What brings fulfillment at the 25th of May not bring fulfillment at 45 or 65. That's not because you were wrong before, it's because you've grown. Life experience adds depth to your understanding, pain, loss, love, success. These experiences stretch your emotional and cognitive capacities, and as they do, they reshape what matters to you. Holding on to an outdated version of purpose out of fear or attachment can create an internal conflict, a quiet dissonance that grows louder over time. But allowing your purpose to evolve with you brings coherence. It aligns your inner world with your outer actions. There's also a neurochemical dimension to this. The brain's reward system is designed to respond to novelty and growth. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter most associated with motivation and drive, is activated not just by achieving goals but by the pursuit of goals that stretch your abilities. When your purpose evolves and you rise to meet it, you engage this reward system, you stay neurologically engaged. This is why people who continue to evolve their sense of purpose tend to stay more mentally agile, more emotionally resilient, and more creatively engaged throughout life. Of course, change is uncomfortable. Letting go of an old identity, even one that no longer fits, can feel like losing a part of yourself, but in reality you are not losing anything essential. You are shedding what has become too small for you. You are making room for the next version of who you are becoming, and that process, though sometimes painful, is profoundly life-affirming. It honors the fact that you are a living, breathing, learning organism, not a finished product. This mindset also protects against one of the great traps of modern life, burnout disguised as ambition. When people lock themselves into one fixed version of purpose, especially one that no longer inspires them, they often keep pushing out of duty, fear, or external validation. The result is exhaustion, disconnection, and eventually collapse. But when you allow your purpose to evolve, you stay connected to intrinsic motivation. You work not from pressure but from passion. You pursue what's meaningful now, not what once was. And in doing so, you build a sustainable, energizing path forward. So instead of asking yourself, "What is my purpose?" as if it's a singular, permanent answer, a more empowering question is, "What is my purpose right now? What is calling me forward in this season of life? What feels meaningful based on who I am today?" With all that I've experienced and learned, this approach doesn't weaken your sense of direction, it strengthens it. It keeps you agile, awake, and in relationship with the present moment. Your purpose is not a destination, it's a direction. And that direction can and should shift as you do. Embracing this truth gives you permission to evolve, it frees you from the pressure of perfection and opens the door to continuous discovery. In a world that is always changing, your greatest power lies in your ability to adapt, not by abandoning who you are, but by expanding into all that you're capable of becoming. One of the most profound truths about finding your purpose is the realization that it cannot be found in isolation. While self-reflection, introspection, and individual effort are key components in understanding what gives your life meaning, purpose is most often realized through connection with others. The human experience is inherently social, and the relationships we form, the communities we participate in, and the collective causes we contribute to shape our understanding of why we are here. This interconnectedness forms the very fabric of our purpose. It's not something we carve out alone, but something that emerges when we engage with others and the world around us. From a biological standpoint, humans are deeply wired for connection. Our brains are not only designed to survive in isolation but to thrive in community. Mirror neurons, for example, allow us to feel empathy by mimicking the emotions of those around us. We are hardwired to share in the joys and sorrows of others, to build social bonds, and to engage in collective efforts. These connections influence our motivations, our values, and our sense of purpose. When you help someone else, when you collaborate on a shared goal, or when you contribute to a cause greater than yourself, you are activating a deeper layer of your brain that reinforces meaning and fulfillment. This is why many people report that they feel a deeper sense of purpose when they are giving back, whether that's through community service, mentorship, or supporting a cause they believe in. Psychologically, humans are also driven by what's called prosocial behavior, actions that benefit others. This is not just a moral or ethical concept, it's something deeply ingrained in our evolutionary makeup. Research has shown that acts of kindness, cooperation, and altruism not only improve the well-being of others, but also boost our own happiness and sense of fulfillment. Helping others provides a sense of meaning because it aligns with our natural desire to contribute to the greater good. Our brains release feel-good hormones, like oxytocin, when we connect with others in meaningful ways, reinforcing our sense of social bond and ultimately purpose. The communities we belong to also play a crucial role in shaping our sense of purpose. A community provides context, a mirror for our values and actions. It's in community that we learn what we stand for, where we test our beliefs, and where we find like-minded individuals who reflect and amplify our sense of direction. When you are part of a group that shares common goals, interests, or values, you experience a sense of belonging that cannot be easily replaced by individual achievement. The shared experiences, collective struggles, and mutual support within a community foster a deep sense of purpose. This collective energy provides a sense of momentum and a sense that you're part of something much larger than yourself. It reinforces the idea that your actions, your contributions, matter not just for you but for the collective. At the same time, being part of a community also provides a structure for growth. Through the feedback, support, and challenges offered by others, you learn more about who you are and what you care about. Relationships force you to confront aspects of yourself you might otherwise ignore. They provide opportunities for personal growth that simply cannot occur in isolation. Sometimes you are pushed to take on responsibilities that force you to rise to the occasion and tap into strengths you didn't know you had. These moments of challenge often illuminate parts of your purpose that remain hidden until they are needed. They show you what you're capable of when you step out of your comfort zone and work alongside others for a greater cause. Furthermore, the power of shared experiences cannot be overstated. When you experience a difficult or transformative event with others, it creates a sense of solidarity and shared meaning. It's in the collective overcoming of challenges, the shared joy of success, or the mutual comfort in times of loss that you begin to realize how much purpose is anchored in connection. The relationships forged in these moments often become the foundation for a deeper understanding of purpose. They act as both a mirror and a guide, showing you what you value and reminding you of your own capacity for growth, contribution, and love. The social context of purpose also extends to the global and societal level. In an interconnected world, our actions have ripple effects that extend far beyond our immediate circle. Contributing to social causes, environmental movements, or global challenges not only shapes our sense of purpose but also ties us to a broader narrative. You begin to see your role in a larger context: the fight for justice, the preservation of the planet, the advancement of human rights, or the improvement of health and well-being. These global issues provide a canvas on which your purpose can be painted. They offer a sense of direction, a sense that your actions can contribute to the greater good, no matter how small they may seem. Additionally, technology has created new ways for people to connect and collaborate. Social media, online communities, and virtual networks provide platforms where people can unite around shared purposes, regardless of geographical location. These digital spaces allow for a vast exchange of ideas, resources, and support, creating opportunities for collective action in ways that were once impossible. Through these virtual communities, people can find purpose in the exchange of knowledge, the support of others' endeavors, and the advocacy of causes they are passionate about. The digital world expands the possibilities for collective purpose, enabling us to connect with like-minded individuals and groups who share our values and aspirations. However, it's important to recognize that the quest for purpose through connection doesn't mean relying solely on external validation or the approval of others. There is a delicate balance between finding purpose through social interaction and maintaining a sense of individuality. You must learn to engage with the world without losing sight of who you are, your values, and your unique contribution. It's about harmonizing your personal identity with your place within the larger social fabric. While the external world plays a crucial role in shaping your sense of purpose, true fulfillment arises when you contribute to that world while staying grounded in your own sense of self. Ultimately, purpose is not just something that lives within you, it's something that is activated, nourished, and enriched through connection with others. When you open yourself to relationships, communities, and causes greater than yourself, you tap into a wellspring of meaning that is both deeply personal and profoundly collective. Your sense of purpose becomes intertwined with the people, the causes, and the movements you support. And through these connections you realize that your purpose is not something you have to discover on your own, it's something that emerges naturally as you engage with the world around you, build relationships, and contribute to the collective good.